Welcome back to Martial Arts in Chinese Literature and Films. In this lecture, we'll introduce the concept of xia, the martial arts fighter in the Chinese tradition, and then address the distinctive image of the lady warrior, or 女侠, and the related questions of gender. As a type of cultural image in the Chinese tradition, a xia warrior is characterized not just by martial skills, but more so by a determined mindset, a strong sense of personal loyalty, and a larger-than-life personality. The assassins we have learned about earlier are an origin of this cultural image. During the early Han Dynasty, the term Youxia, the wandering warrior, emerged to designate groups of martial arts fighters. Sima Qian's historical records, 史记, include detailed biographies about these wandering warriors, or Youxia. Based on his biographies, these warrior groups resemble modern-day mafias. Members of these groups were prone to violence and engaged in criminal activities. However, some of them had a generous, charismatic personality and great social influences during the time. Guo Jie, for instance, was a famous Youxia, or rather crime lord, who was well known around Sima Qian's time. Guo Jie was known for his willingness to help others resolve their disagreements or troubles, and was dedicated to any mission entrusted to him. However, government officials and the Emperor Wu himself had long been wary of the influences he had. Eventually, one of Guo Jie's followers brutally murdered a scholar who dared to criticize Guo Jie. Guo Jie was implicated in this case. Given the practice of collective punishment during the time, he and his whole clan were executed as a result. The terrible punishment Guo Jie received exemplifies Emperor Wu of Han's determination to stamp out Youxia or wandering warrior groups, since their influences directly threatened the authority of the imperial court and its rule of law. Indeed, as a social group, Youxia disappeared in Chinese history since the reign of Emperor Wu. However, their images survived in cultural memory and took on fantastic characteristics in later literary representations. As a cultural image, xia embodies values that either correspond to or diverge from China's main philosophies. First of all, in comparison with the Confucian school, we have mentioned that strongest convergence between the two sides rests in the moral cult of integrity, or yi, and the related values of filial piety and moral reciprocity in terms of bao. Overall, both Confucianism and the Code of Xia promote these values, even though xia figures push them to an extreme, often to the point of self-sacrifice. At first glance, Taoism may look very different from the image of xia. Nevertheless, if we delve into this question further, we see that the two sides in fact share some common features. Especially, Taoism and the spirit of xia both promote a larger-than-life individualism and manifest a tendency to go against social conventions. To an extent, xia figures embody the reclusiveness of Taoism, since they detach themselves from the material world and pursue larger spiritual values. Furthermore, we have seen that the transmutability of water in Taoism serves as an important metaphor for martial arts, which emphasizes spontaneous reactions rather than rigid forms. Historically, Taoism also assumed magical and religious characteristics since the late Han Dynasty period. We'll see this fantastic aspect of Taoism in many martial arts stories, including The Journey to the West. The magical quality of qi, which could mean air or breath, in the Taoist tradition is the cultural origin of the so-called light technique, or qinggong, you see in the ethereal flying scenes of martial arts films such as Hero and Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. Finally, as we can see from both historical cases and modern film Hero, the spirit of Xia is quite contrary to legalism. We have mentioned that Emperor Wu of Han cracked down on the influential Youxia groups of the time, and later the idea of Xia survived mostly as a cultural and literary image and took on fantastic characteristics. Now, after introducing these basic characteristics of the Xia culture, let's discuss the question of gender in the tradition of martial arts stories. As we shall see, this question is prominent in the film Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, which portrays images of the lady warrior, Onu Xia. We all know that traditional Chinese culture is deeply patriarchal or male-centered. More specifically, the traditional Chinese gender ideology is based on an inner-outer distinction according to the 5 cardinal relations in Confucianism. We have mentioned earlier that husband-wife is one of the cardinal relations, and this relationship is defined by their separate functions. That is, the husband took charge of the outside or socioeconomic activities, whereas the wife took charge of domestic duties. A wife was not supposed to go outside the household and receive outside male guests. Indeed, traditionally, a man would literally call his wife 内人, the inner person. In other words, there was a social custom of gender segregation in traditional China, and women were forbidden from being active in the public sphere. A woman had no opportunity to participate in civil examinations and take on official appointments, which was the primary ladder of success in traditional China. Marriage was perceived to be the only destiny for a woman, and for that she had to depend on the arrangement of her parents. In this system of gender segregation and arranged marriage, a young woman often met her husband for the first time on her wedding night. The patriarchal structure of traditional China had much to do with this patrilineal family structure. That is, family lineage was traced through the male descendants. Based on this custom, filial piety and ancestral worship, these fundamental duties in Confucianism, could only be completed by the sons. A daughter, on the other hand, was supposed to become her husband's subordinate through marriage and be filially devoted to her parents-in-law. This traditional family structure resulted in a preference for boys in the Chinese tradition, a gender bias that unfortunately continued to various extents in modern China. Whereas the patriarchal structure of Chinese society came into place since a very early period, there are important shifts in women's experience and status throughout traditional Chinese history. For instance, women during the Tang Dynasty seem to enjoy a greater degree of physical and social mobility in comparison to the later periods. We can tell that from figurines of the period showing women riding on horseback or even playing horse polo. Likely, it is not coincidental that the Tang Dynasty produced China's only woman emperor Wu Zetian, one of the most legendary figures in Chinese history. Many of you might be aware of the tradition of foot binding, 缠足, among Chinese women in the past. This tradition did not take place until around the second half of the history of imperial China, starting around the Song Dynasty. It became extremely prevalent during China's last two imperial dynasties, Ming and Qing, but only among Han Chinese women. Aiming at achieving the so-called 3-inch lotus shape, foot binding was detrimental to women's physical mobility in general. However, there have been revisionist historical works in recent years to re-examine this phenomenon beyond a simple victimization narrative and to investigate women's subjective experiences and forms of agency through this cultural history. Historically, there were certainly famous women who left their names and legacies behind, and imperial politics frequently fell into the control of powerful empresses or empress dowagers. From time to time, we may observe from past literary and cultural works certain expressions against the unequal gender relation in Chinese society. Another class I teach, women writers in Chinese history, cover these topics in detail. During China's revolutionary period of the early 20th century, women's liberation became a central agenda. Overall, women's status changed in pragmatic ways in modern China. It may be said that contemporary Chinese society is characterized by greater gender equality in certain areas in comparison to Western societies. For instance, in general, Chinese women do not change their maiden names after marriage. Nevertheless, some old biases continued, and women continue to face heavier and more complex burdens in terms of their work-life balance. Based on this brief overview, we can see that the idea of a woman warrior or 女侠 is very much outside the bounds of social reality in the context of traditional China. For this reason, this image naturally possesses a fantastic characteristic and became the stuff of fiction and legends. These stories subvert the gender assumptions in traditional China and manifest some unusually independent female images from the traditional period. Likely, you are already well aware of the legend of the woman warrior Mulan, thanks to the 1998 Disney classic Mulan. Long before the Disney version, the story of Mulan has been circulating in the Chinese tradition for over a millennium, generating many adaptations in traditional theater and folk stories and in films during the 20th century. The source of the Mulan tradition is, in fact, a relatively short narrative poem entitled The Ballad of Mulan, 木兰辞, dating roughly to the 4th century. This poem is still widely known today, and many native speakers of Chinese can recite it from the beginning to the end. The ballad starts with the scene of Mulan's weaving by the window, that is doing a woman's work. Yet her shuttle has stopped, and she is sighing. An interlocutor, possibly her mother, asks what's on her mind, and she answers that there's nothing. Here the ballad borrows a conventional opening from popular love ballads of the time. In a typical love ballad, the girl who has stopped weaving typically goes on to say that she has grown up and wishes to marry, or she's secretly in love with someone. In borrowing this formulaic beginning, the Ballad of Mulan subverts the reader's expectations, since Mulan's subsequent answer indicates that her worries have nothing to do with love or romance. With this beginning, the poem foreshadows Mulan's independent image as a woman warrior. As Mulan's answer goes, last night I saw conscription lists. The Kong is calling troops everywhere. The army's rolling were in 12 scrolls, and every scroll had father's name. My father has no older son. Mulan has no big brother. I wish to go by horse and gear and march to the wars for father. 昨夜见军帖，可汗大点兵。军书12卷，卷卷有爷名。阿爷无大儿，木兰无长兄。愿为市鞍马，从此替爷征。What's notable is the reference to the dynasty's ruler as Kang or Kehan. This is a phrase used for the ruler of non-Han dynasties or kingdoms. We need to know that the Ballad of Mulan emerged in the north during the period of division called Northern and Southern dynasties. The Northern dynasties were ruled by non-Han ethnicities. So, could the original Mulan come from the Hu or Han people, contrary to the Disney version that portrays her as an ultra-Han Chinese heroine and the Hans as her demon-like enemies? Signs from the poem indicate that this is a great likelihood. During the period of division, the northern dynasties assimilated many Chinese influences. Also, the Ballad of Mulan, as we have now, could be a work of multiple authors and mixed origins, and could have been partly written or rewritten by Han Chinese in the south. The motivation for Mulan to attend the army is indeed very Confucian in nature. It is owing to her filial piety to her father. At the same time, as a woman warrior, Mulan's filial piety diverges from the typical gender expectations according to which a woman should devote her filial duties to her husband's parents rather than her own. This is an important pattern in stories about other lady warriors. In fact, in these stories, we frequently see the more extreme theme of filial revenge, as the daughter goes to extreme lengths to revenge the death of her father. The image of flying snow in Hero is a continuation of this tradition. And you can read some stories of this kind in the optional readings, such as A Brave Girl Named Shang San Guan from this week. So, while often embodying Confucian values, the image of lady warriors like Mulan does manifest a more independent womanhood or personhood that's not tied to marriage and wifehood. On the flip side, let me say that the Confucian principle of filial piety created a cultural framework for these lady warriors to be celebrated as heroic cultural figures, despite her radical departure from the gender convention. Given this cultural framework of filial piety, the Mulan in the original ballad didn't run away from her family like a rebellious American teenager as portrayed in the Disney film. Rather, she formally bade goodbye to her parents and embarked on her journey as a soldier. As the poem goes, at dawn she took her parents' leave. By the Yellow River she camped at dusk. She did not hear her parents' calls. She heard only the sounds of the waters of the Yellow River rolling. 朝辞爷娘去，暮宿黄河边。不闻爷娘唤女声，但闻黄河流水鸣溅溅。It may also surprise you that the original ballad states that she spent for about a decade on the battleground in her male disguise. This experience is described in very brief but evocative terms in the ballad. She went thousands of miles to battle. She flew across fortified passes. The north wind carried the sounds of the watch, and cold light shone on her armor. After many a battle, the general died. After 10 years, the stout troops went home. 万里赴戎机，关山度若飞。朔气传金柝，寒光照铁衣。将军百战死，壮士10年归。 The 10 years in these lines is a rough number. Later we see that Mulan actually spent 12 years in the army. The phrase "the general died" is a conventional term portraying the perils of the battleground, rather than the actual death of any specific individual in Mulan's story. If you still remember, the Disney film includes a character named General Li as Mulan's love interest. This character is an utter invention by Disney and doesn't exist anywhere in the original ballad or later adaptations in the Chinese tradition. Finally, when returning to the imperial court, Mulan didn't reveal her female identity to the emperor. Instead of claiming any official ranks, she requested to return home to be with her family. Once back home, she put on her female clothes and revealed her true identity to her fellow soldiers. The poem thus concludes with an interesting image. The male hare's legs have a nervous spring, the eyes of the girl hare wander, but when two hares run side by side, who can tell if I'm boy or girl? 雄兔脚扑朔，雌兔眼迷离，双兔傍地走，安能辨我是雄雌？ The metaphor of the hare is extremely interesting here, especially considering the ballad's elaborate portrayal of Mulan's cross-dressing, first from a woman to a man and then from a man to a woman. With the image of the hare, the gender of which is difficult to tell as they are not subjected to the trappings of civilization, that is clothes, the ballad seems to suggest a point of view that's surprisingly progressive. That is, gender is a cultural construct manifested by signs such as fashion and may not be so fundamental or essential to the actions or capabilities of an individual. Thus, the original Mulan, despite her obviously conservative features, is characterized by a more open-ended ethnic and gender identity in comparison to the Disney version. For the tradition of the lady warrior, Mulan's story represents a Confucian framework which, while tying this image to mainstream values, also allowed for the expression of a more independent female image. After looking at the story of Mulan and the Confucian image of the lady warrior she embodies, let's further introduce the Taoist dimension that sometimes underlines such an image. For that, let's turn to an interesting Tang Dynasty story, roughly from the 8th century, entitled Swordswoman Yin Yang, Nie Yin Yang. We have related Taoism to a radical pursuit of spiritual freedom, a detachment from the social world, a rejection of conventions, and an association with magic. In this story, we'll see all these elements. In fact, this story has an overwhelmingly Taoist framework and subverts fundamental Confucian values, including filial piety. You're going to see that the female protagonist, Yin Yang, is strikingly unconventional, much more so than Mulan. As the story tells us, Yin Yang was the daughter of a high-ranking general, and she was kidnapped by a mysterious Taoist nun when she was 10. After 5 years, Yin Yang returned to her family, saying that she had been in a mountain learning magical skills with the nun and 2 other young girls. The girl thus portrayed her training to her family. The nun gave me a pill and also a sword, which she told me to carry with me always. It was about 2 feet long and so sharp that you could cut a hair by blowing it against the blade. From the 2 girls, I learned to climb the rocks and trees, and soon my body grew as light as the breeze. After a year, I was able to kill monkeys and tigers and leopards with little effort. After 3 years, I could throw my sword and strike down eagles and hawks without fail. The sword had gradually shrunk to about 5 inches, and it flashed through the air so fast that the birds never knew what had struck them. Then the nun sent her on assassination missions. Due to her incredible speed, she could strike down the target in broad daylight and left without anyone noticing. Finally, the nun told her to go back home and they would meet again after 20 years. Before they parted, the nun used magic to cut open the back part of the girl's head and hide a dagger in it, telling her that she'll be able to use the dagger whenever the need arose. The father was very much in fear of his daughter after learning about what she is capable of. Later, Yin Yang randomly pointed at a young man who was a mirror grinder on the street as her husband, and her father agreed. Still later, the father passed away, and Yin Yang and her husband, who happened to have magical ability as well, came into the service of a powerful warlord. One day, the warlord sent them to assassinate a high official named Liu Changyi, who was his enemy. However, after observing Liu in person, Yin Yang believed that he was more upright and wiser than the warlord and defected to serve Liu instead. The story continues to describe some fantastic battles fought between Yin Yang and the assassins with supernatural abilities sent by the warlord in retaliation. In the final battle, Yin Yang transformed herself into a net and hid in the stomach of Liu to protect him. She then fended off the assassin, who was capable of making himself invisible through her magic. Several years later, Yin Yang decided to pursue the secret of immortality by going into the mountains. She bade goodbye to Liu, who she had been serving, and asked him to take good care of her husband. Then she left without a trace. The story ends with the report of Yin Yang's encounter with Liu's son about 20 years later. Yin Yang, whose appearance remained the same, warned Liu's son of an impending danger. Liu's son didn't heed her warning and soon died as she predicted. As we can see from this synopsis, this is a very strange story and may not make much sense in terms of its plot. However, the image of the female protagonist, whose magical abilities correspond to the Taoist lore of immortals, is memorable for her extreme independence from social conventions and the male characters surrounding her. Her father feared her, and she was clearly in control of her husband. Yin Yang's image is thus characterized by a complete break from the 5 cardinal relations. Being trained by a mysterious nun who seemed to take female disciples only, the story hints on an Amazon-like group of woman warriors with Taoist associations. We have mentioned that due to its challenge to social conventions, Taoism promoted a relatively positive image of women. The Taoist doctrine of seeking immortality and enlightenment away from the material world allowed women to detach themselves from the bond of marriage. For all these reasons, the framework of Taoism could help generate a more independent image of the lady warrior in comparison to the Confucian framework. In 2015, the story of swordswoman Yin Yang is adapted into a martial arts film directed by the famous Taiwan-based director Hou Xiaoxian. The English title of the film is The Assassin. It is an artistic, slow-moving, and visually mesmerizing film. If you enjoy art house films or find the original story fascinating, you should take a look at this adaptation. Here, for the purpose of this class, we'll focus on the 2000 film Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, directed by An Li. Tremendously successful in box office, The film also won an Oscar for Best Foreign Language Film. It inspired a resurgence of martial arts films such as Zhang Yimou's Hero and Hou Xiaoxian's The Assassin. The filmmaker An Li, or Li An, has by now become a major director of a truly global profile. He has been nominated for 9 Academy Awards, of which he has won 3. Best Foreign Language Film for Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, and Best Director for Brokeback Mountain and The Life of Pi. He is the first non-white director to win Best Director. An Li was born in Taiwan in 1954 and came to the United States as a student in 1979. He graduated with an MFA in film production from NYU. An Li spent several years unemployed after graduation. He spent his time working on writing scripts and studying films. He was finally able to launch his career in the early 1990s with several films featuring Asian American experiences and the conflict between Eastern and Western values. Up to now, An Li has created a transnational repertoire of films, vacillating between Chinese topics and subjects from other cultures. While his films have a broad range, they reveal a consistent preoccupation with the character's hidden emotion and desires. In other words, An Li's films are characterized by a psychological approach. You'll see that in Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. The story of Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon is based on an early 20th century martial arts novel of the same title by an author named Wang Dulu. The original novel is not particularly well known, and the film made very major changes to the plot. 2 of the film's main characters are Li Mubai, the martial arts master trained through the Taoist Wudang school, and Yu Xiulian, who was once betrothed to Li Mubai's sworn brother, that is, a friend with whom he had taken a serious oath to treat as his brother by birth. This sworn brother died earlier on, but both Li Mubai and Yu Xiulian were bound by the commitments they had made. As a result, despite their mutual romantic feelings over the years, they couldn't take the step to be together. In contrast to Li Mubai and Yu Xiulian, who embody the Confucian sense of duty, the film's younger female protagonist, Jian, or Yu Jiaolong, which means the Jade Dragon, is an impulsive young lady living in an aristocratic household. Secretly, she's being trained by a female master of the nickname Jade Fox, 闭眼狐狸. Jian desperately tried to escape from a marriage arranged by her family and thus embarked on some dangerous adventures, including stealing Li Mubai's legendary green destiny sword, Qingming Jian. She also had a romantic relationship with a bandit lord named Luo Xiaohu, whose name means the little tiger. The story is set in China's last imperial dynasty Qing, which was ruled by the Manchus. In the film, you can see costumes distinctive of the period. One important concept that appears throughout the film is Jianghu, which literally means rivers and lakes. In the martial arts tradition, the idea of rivers and lakes refers to the world of adventures away from one's family and ordinary life. In the film, you'll see the 2 female characters have quite different perspectives on this world of martial arts fighters. Now, without divulging too much, I invite you to watch the film first. Please pay particular attention to the following aspects: the presence of Confucianism in Taoism, the gender dynamics, the symbolic meanings of the settings and the martial arts choreographies, and the characters' psychological states. I hope you enjoy the film.